welcome to the show, and thanks for taking the time to check us out here. My guest today is Sahaj Ticotin. I think I said that right. He's the frontman for the band Raw. He's also doing a lot of collaboration with some very big-name artists like Tommy Vext from Bad Wolves, LaJohn Witherspoon of Sevendust, the band Starset, and of course, Motley Crue. So we'll get into all of this, plus talk about the curse of Raw, as Sahaj calls it, the struggles the band had, but as well as their success, plus the meaning behind their new single, Intercorrupted, and a lot more. So check this out. Welcome, Sahaj Ticotin. I practiced that. Did I say it right?
You did. It
all right.
Like stick it in.
It's what?
It's like stick it in.
Stick
without the S.
Yeah. So I think I figured this out. You said it's a Russian Jewish father. That's the last name. But your first name is actually, that's not your birth name. It was some sort of name that was sent from India at this like meditation center. I don't know. I'll let you tell the story. I'll probably screw it up.
Yeah. So as far as the name goes, my given name, my mother named me Daniel.
Okay.
But it was sort of one of those weird things where like I grew up never really feeling like a Danny.
Okay.
And it just, I don't know, it never fit. It just always was something very strange. And I met this girl when I was 19 years old who was like a world traveler meditator chick and super into meditation and doing drugs and everything. And I sort of fell in love with her and we ended up sort of having this tumultuous relationship where I matured against my will because she was sort of a terrible girlfriend. But in the process,
we've all been there.
I studied meditation with her and started doing stuff like that. And ultimately it ended up with me and taking what's called sannyas, which was followers of this guy called Osho Rajneesh. And he was alive at the time that I took it, but he died shortly after. But in the interim, I got a new name, and I actually traveled to India shortly after he died. But the name that they gave me was Amrit Sahaj. So Amrit is sort of like a surname, like we have Mr. and Mrs., but in Sanskrit they have more than one. Mm-hmm. So this is Amrit. So Amrit meant eternal, and Sahaj meant spontaneity. And I thought that was a pretty cool name for a musician, and it felt very much like me. I don't know. It was one of those weird things. They gave me the name, and I'm not really like a weird spiritual energy guy, but when they said the name out loud, I sort of laughed for like 15 minutes, like I, heard my real name for the first time,
So you don't do the meditation and all that stuff now then?
I mean, so yes and no. So there's, there's sort of like, we're going to get deep already, huh? So the first thing that, with meditation, at least for me, when I started going deep on it, you realize that music is a very high frequency, but it's not the highest frequency, right? So there's sort of like a spiritual vibration, if you will, that's higher than music. And what I mean by that is sort of like when you hear about like Eastern philosophies, Zen Buddhism, all that stuff, there's always sort of this talk about being of the world, but not in the world, being in the world, but not of the world, and sort of like being beyond the mental attachments, the this is all stuff that gets very complicated quickly, but because in like Christianity, there's a lot of things where people are like, oh, you give up your worldly possessions and live a pious life, and that's sort of a bad symbol of what it is that it started it all. And when it started it all, it was all about sort of like just understanding your attachments, as your emotional attachments, your mental attachments, your pre-programming that you get as a child when you work, when you grow up and turn into an adult, all of a sudden your brain is functioning on a level that's automatic as opposed to free. So basically, through meditation and stuff like that, you're supposed to be able to become more aware of when you're being free and when you're being on autopilot. And so for me, the meditation that I started to dive into was really illustrating that. But the side effect of that was sort of me understanding that there was this other universe that was sort of cooler than music. And I know that's a weird thing to say, but there was something more sort of beautiful in the universe than just music. So when I became a full-time musician and a professional musician, there was a little bit of a compromise I had to make, because there was no way to really, really be in tune with music, but also still sort of in the back of your head feel like, well, that's not the end of the road. So I sort of had to make it the end of the road for me. I had to sort of decide that my form of meditation was going to be music, and that I was going to try and practice through music and see if I can get glimpses into the higher levels while using music. Now, of course, music is an intrinsic part of any like Eastern meditation and stuff like that, but it's always just a tool you use to get somewhere. Whereas like I'm trying to reproduce.
Yeah.
And by the way, when I say I'm trying to do this with 20% of the songs, the other 80% of the songs, I'm just trying to get on the radio and make cookie songs. But the 20% of the raw catalog that has, like A Poet's Dream or Crawling to the Sky, these kind of songs that are literally, or Undertaken, that are literally just poems designed to sort of create a landscape within you. Those songs are what I'm talking about here. So there was a little bit of a sacrifice. So to answer your question, I don't really sit down and meditate like I used to, and I don't practice it, but there are times when I'm writing certain kinds of music, depending on the band, depending on the artist, where I feel that I'm touching something immortal.
Yeah.
And that is the part that is higher in vibration.
Yeah. Well, so, and because I think there's different forms of meditation. I mean, I remember somebody telling me that even just taking a walk can be meditation. If you're focusing on the left foot, right foot, left, that it's like being in the moment, I would say, for a lot of meditation. It's just, being in there, because we're so distracted in this world with everything that's going on. It's like, it's hard for us to like really be in the moment, or like you said, to this higher spiritual level. So
yeah, my favorite analogy was always the sky analogy, the clouds in the sky. So when you're sort of unconscious and you're just dealing with all the garbage that you're dealing with all day and night, it's a cloudy day. It's just cloudy. There are clouds passing all the time. You're so focused on the clouds that you forget that there's a sky behind it.
Right.
And the more that you allow the clouds to pass, the more you can see the sky, the clearer it gets. So the practice of meditation is letting the clouds pass without actually trying to focus on them, to focus on the sky beyond the clouds. And that analogy to me has always been beautiful, because it's that thing where it really takes an enormous amount of effort to not do anything.
Yeah, no, I know.
So
That's
being
what,
in the present, being in the
hard.
present, of course, is the ultimate goal. But that's one of those things. It's like, oh, just play an Eddie Van Halen solo. You know, it's like you don't just sit down and do it.
It takes practice. Yeah, I used to take like meditation classes. I remember my teacher was like, "You have monkey brain," because I just couldn't I can't focus. It's like hard to just relax. It's hard to turn your brain out, but that's what you try. But anyways, let's talk about music a little bit. So you started getting into music it sounds like a very young age. Like one of the first things you did was you sang the solos in Charlie Daniels' fiddle solo band. You were like humming that, but then the really interesting one was where you tell the story about how your brother brought home this like jazz fusion album, and you were like acting out all the different, you thought like the characters, and you kind of made it almost like a play, it sounds like, or like you're kind of acting out what the singers were doing.
Yeah, I mean, I was super duper young, and my brother Marcus brought home a record called "The Romantic Warrior" by a band called Return to Forever. Now, for anyone who's a musician and a musician's musician, this band had like the most insane people in it. So it had Chick Corea playing piano, it had Stanley Clarke playing playing bass. It had Al Di Meola playing guitar, and it had Lenny White playing drums. This combination of like apex predators when it comes to musicianship had made this record. And what was amazing to me at 5 or 6 or 7 years old was they really did, and maybe, obviously I'm a kid, so I'm sort of fantasizing it anyway, but they named each song based around, it was almost like the cover art. I felt like the cover art came before the album, which of course it didn't. But in my brain, the cover was this incredible knight, and he was the romantic warrior. So there was this entire every song had the majestic dance was one, the jester versus the tyrant was another one. Like they had these cartoonish titles. And it was just this thing where I was so obsessed with the melodicism that was connecting with me that I was able to invent sort of a dialogue between the instruments and create this storyline, which I think they did consciously. I don't think, there's certainly a beginning, a middle, and end if you read the track list, because the final thing is the duel between the tyrant and the jester. It's like, it ends like an action movie. So for me, that was the beginning. And immediately after discovering that was when I discovered both Zenyatta Mandata by the Police and Security by Peter Gabriel. So those two records right there were direct descendants of my love for Return to Forever. And what's weird is 20 years later, I read an article by Sting where he said the only two artists that ever changed his life watching them live was Jimi Hendrix in Newcastle and seeing Return to Forever. And I thought that was the craziest thing ever.
That is crazy,
that just blew my mind.
Did you ever meet Peter Gabriel or Sting or any of those guys? Your heroes?
The only one out of that entire camp that I ever met was Tony Levin, who was the bass player for Peter Gabriel for many, many, many years. He was on that Security album all the way up until most recently, So I met Tony Levin because he used to live in Woodstock, New York. So I met him a bunch of times when I was up there working. And I met Sting met him at Carnegie Hall and then another time at a show, but it was like, oh, nice to meet you, blah. And that was it. Never had a conversation. I don't know if he knows I exist, although we did do a Police cover that his manager, Miles Copeland, had to approve.
Sure.
So there is a chance that he's heard my voice, but never got to have a conversation with him. Never got to, meet Peter Gabriel or my other idols, which were U2 and or Prince. Those are all like my sort of like pre-hard rock idols.
Okay.
The cool thing about the hard rock idols is that I've pretty much met every one of those. So I'm pretty stoked on that.
That's really cool. Yeah. So this is interesting. You started singing in the Glee Club in junior high and you would get like called for all the solos and you didn't like that because the other kids kind of resented you. So eventually you just got so tired of it that you quit. Like, how did your teacher and your parents let you quit if you had such an amazing gift?
My parents, I was the youngest of 6 and everyone else were already musicians and artists in some capacity. They were dancers and performers in some capacity. I don't think they felt by the time they got to me that they had the need or the desire to sort of shape my conclusions when it came to stuff like that. So my mom really had nothing to say about me quitting the Glee Club. The teacher, I remember her name was Mrs. Lehman. She was very upset because she basically, I remember in 6th grade, she pulled me aside and she said, I don't understand why you don't want to do this. This is so easy for you. And I said, and I was a fat kid. And I was just really trying, I wanted to be cool so bad that I just didn't think singing solos in Glee Club was cool. I didn't mind. I did a couple of plays, one of which was West Side Story, and I crushed that. I had like a blast doing it. But the Glee Club thing was like, singing Climb Every Mountain in an auditorium. And it was just sort of the stuff that I was just like, I don't know, I just didn't, I was already starting to rebel. I was starting to get into hip hop. I was starting to do graffiti. I was starting to break dance, all of that stuff, all at that time. And it just got pretty uncool pretty quick to the point that when I went to high school, I didn't audition. I auditioned for singing and I auditioned for painting and I got in for both.
Right.
But I chose painting.
Yeah. And then you met some guy there that you were in a band with called Cross of Snow. Is that what it was called in the early 90s? And then, I don't know if you broke up but eventually you meet this, tell me this story. You met this guy who was like a hedge fund trader and he was kind of like your mentor and he kind of bought you like a recording studio and let you live in his basement. Like, how do you find somebody like, I want to find someone like that just like takes me under their wing and like help. I mean, that must, he's like a gift from God, right? I mean, having that kind of help.
Yeah. Well, I'm a weird person. Even to this day, I've never really looked at fortune, like good fortune, as like something I earned. So when things good have happened to me, I sort of take the perspective of, I don't want to fuck this up. I don't want to take this for granted.
Right.
And I don't want to dote on it at all. I want to utilize that moment to the most that I can. My sister Nancy, who's been in, my sister Rachel's been in a million movies, but my sister
so cool.
my sister Nancy has also been in some movies, but she's also been on Broadway for many years. And she was dating this guy. And they didn't date for very long, but in the process, she introduced him to me. And he was a hedge fund trader in Greenwich, Connecticut. And he basically was like, I want to build a studio in my house. So can you find me the stuff to do that? And he gave me a check for $13,000 and said, I made my first order in 1994. I made my first order to Sweetwater Sound, which is now, of course, a massive company, but they were a small company back then. And I did an online order because they didn't charge sales tax. And I bought an ADAT and a Mackie 24x8 console. And we started a recording studio in his house in Greenwich. Cut to a few years later, and we've upgraded significantly. Now we have 3 Tascam D88s, and we have an additional expansion to the mixer. So it was 48x8, and then all this outboard gear and speakers and the NS10s that I still have at my studio here. And he basically just bought this stuff, put it in the bottom. He had an 8,000 square foot house. He put the studio on the bottom floor of it, and I basically had the entire floor. It was just me and him.
Did you live there? Did you live in the basement?
I lived there for 3 years.
Didn't know why. Did he really believe in your music, or he just wanted to do this as a hobby, or like what was his reasoning?
I think it became, well, first of all, I think it became sort of a dual thing, right? Because I was his Kato Kaelin. I was the guy he hung out with, and I lived in his house.
That's awesome. That's a great analogy.
Yeah, and I had fun. We did a lot of really, really fun stuff.
Yeah.
And he would, I was non-threatening to him.
Okay.
I always, as I said before, with opportunity, I always go out of my way. So I never was like a burden on him. I didn't cost him money. I would try and put money in his pocket whenever I could. And he bought all this gear, obviously, for me, but it was his, and there was no misunderstanding about that, And I taught myself how to, the basics of engineering and producing there. And this is all pre-Pro Tools. So when I was recording takes, live. And if I didn't do it good, I just had to do it again. It wasn't like I could stack 20 takes and then pick the best one. I only had 24 channels for a whole recording.
Yeah.
So it was pretty crazy, but
That's
it was
crazy.
really, really a great lesson. And by the time I got signed to my first real record deal, I was fairly equipped just because of what I had learned through him.
Sure. So why did you explain the name Ra? It's you named the band after the Egyptian sun god. Is that correct?
Yeah.
But do you think there was ever a problem? Because I noticed it's like so annoying whenever I try to type in your guys' band on like Spotify or even just like on Google, it always will send like any website. I go like Concert Archives. I'm trying to see what shows you guys have done. And I'm like RA, and it just gives you this giant list. I'm like, no, that's the band. That's it. RA. And then like, did you find that like annoying as well?
Well, obviously, when we invented the name, it was 1998.
Yeah.
So there wasn't algorithms. Algorithms were driving exactly 0% of people's searches at that point. At least there was nobody really using the internet to find us.
Okay.
So, and even if they did, I still feel like it was easier back then than it is now. But anyway, the cool part of having that name in the old days was that if you looked on a poster and there was a whole bunch of bands, there would be bands that had 1 or 2 words or just long words. If you looked at a poster and it said Linkin Park, System of a Down, but if it just said Ra, it always stuck out because it was so short. And oftentimes And oftentimes in the list, it was the biggest thing because each band had a finite amount of space to fill up. So we would fill up the listing. So we were always,
that's smart.
People noticed the band. But of course, that backfired horribly as soon as Real Audio and rheumatoid arthritis and all of the things that start with RA became the dominant things in the Google search.
What about like Raw Sushi, the restaurant? I don't know if you guys have those down here. It's like a chain. Does that one get there's no lawsuits?
I don't find that very much. And then if you go to Spotify, a lot of times it's based on your search history. So if you're a pop chick, then you might search Rachel What's-Her-Face, and Rachel Platten might be the person that comes up when you put up Raw. You know, like I know a lot of friends in the rock universe that they'll get Rage Against the Machine or Rammstein before Raw, the band, starts to show up. So the cool thing about Spotify is for each person, it's individual. So if you search our place, if you search us multiple times, eventually it starts showing you us all the time because it remembers where you've been the most. So now, like on my own personal Spotify, if I go on, there's always the Raw thing is always there.
Okay. Yeah. Another shortcut I found is like either typing in the name of an album or a song will also that
leads me to the most recent single, because I literally named the song. I mean, obviously when I was writing it, I wrote it under the criteria of a cool name, but then when it came to actually choosing a single and sort of naming the album, I was consistent with Intercorrupted because it's not a real word. So
that's smart.
If you search Intercorrupted on Spotify, exactly 0 things come up except us.
Yeah, no, and I love that song. Yeah, I want to get to that too. But so going back to like how you guys got signed, this was like kind of a crazy story too, that you kind of had you didn't own the masters, but you were like selling the records illegally, and then you had to buy them back or something. What was the story with that?
So the way we got away with this is basically that the first real label we signed to was a subsidiary of Sony called Adel America. So Adel in Germany is the largest independent record company in all of Europe. It's called Adele. Okay. So that was huge at the time, but they decided, you know what, we're going to take a stab at the US, and they created Adel America. And that was the label that we signed to first. Now, the cool thing about that was that there weren't a lot of artists on us, and we were supposedly a priority. But even before we finished our record, the record company pulled out of the US and closed down the label. So the label got closed before we ever put out a single song. And I was stuck with these masters that Sony owned that I couldn't use for anything, but that had my best songs on them. So my option was either go back into the studio, re-record them all, or when I talked to my attorney, he was like, you know what? This is so small and so under the radar, we might be able to get away with it as long, for a period of time until it gets big enough, and then we'll deal with it then.
Yeah.
So basically what we did is we made a deal with a company out of Phoenix, Arizona, that was a distribution company. And they ended up putting the record in like Newbury Comics up Northeast. And WAAF was spinning Do You Call My Name, which was, Mistress Carrie was the DJ who found us and discovered us and put us on the air. And sort of like, it was one of those weird, those fairy tale stories where somebody plays a song and the phones light up and all the stuff that doesn't happen anymore, but basically it was one of those things where like no one knew us, we had no following, and somebody played a song and the phones light up, and then 2 months later we're selling 20,000 records of this EP that we put out on our own that we didn't own. So when it got to the point where we were getting offers and we were figuring out where we were going to go for a label, and we were talking to Universal Republic, my attorney was like, look, I'm going to draw you up a document. We're going to connect with the guy at Sony, and you need to buy your masters back. And I was like, okay. So I arranged a meeting. I drive downtown in a cab with a certified check for $15,000, and gave him $15,000. He signed the paperwork, brought the paperwork back up, literally got in a cab, rode the 20-minute ride uptown to 57th Street and 7th, walked upstairs, and signed an $850,000 record deal with Universal Republic.
Wow. So there was that short time in the middle where you were unsigned, though.
Right. I was unsigned for 20 minutes.
Yeah. So then they released the album. You guys get a song on Carry 2. You got some singles on the radio.
The Carry 2 thing.
But that was before, right?
Is on Adel America.
Okay, so that was before. So that got you some exposure, though. Yeah.
That was literally a one-off.
Okay.
Just for that film.
Right. So, but then so you get the deal. You get songs on the radio. You're doing tours. You're opening for Seether and Stone Sour, and this is interesting. Because I interviewed PJ Farley. I love that guy. And I'm a big Trixter fan. But I'm fascinated that you reached out to him to be in the band, and he turned you down. Because like I always thought that there was kind of this like hairband discrimination back then in the 90s, almost like where people like, they didn't want to be associated, but you actually wanted him in the band. He's the one that turned you down. And then you reached out to him again after you were touring. Because did he not believe that you guys were going to make it or something? Or he just wanted to.
I think in the initial approach, there just was no, PJ was already at a point where if he was going to do sort of sideman gigs, he was going to get paid.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't have money to pay anybody at the point at which this is prior to going to Boston and prior to sort of blowing up on the radio and prior to doing all that stuff. So we had no money. And I think he just looked at it from the perspective of, well, I can't, really just jump out of everything else that I'm doing and join your band without some sort of paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
And we just couldn't afford that. So he passed on it. We ended up using someone else who was a friend of Mistress Carrie and WAAF. And he was a cool dude, and I still love him to this day, but there are a variety of things happened that made it an unworkable business relationship. And we ended up parting our ways, and I called PJ, and now I'm calling PJ. We're already on tour with Stone Sour in a tour bus making money.
Nice.
So I was able to give him a salary in the beginning.
Oh, that's
and
cool.
He just literally stopped everything he was doing and jumped in a plane and came out.
But did you know of his, like, he was in Trixter and you were like, I don't care. Like, he's a good bass player.
I didn't really care about that. I actually had gone to a place. One at the time, location was sort of relevant.
Yeah. Okay.
So I was living in New Jersey, and Farley was living in New Jersey, and Scooter was living in New Jersey, and Ben was relocating to New Jersey in order to do all this stuff. So that was relevant. And I'd watched him, play in
40-Foot Ringo. Yeah.
No, 40-Foot Ringo, but also I watched him play just cover band. I think it was Sugar Belly or something like that.
Yeah.
And he played in cover bands, and I was just like, this guy's pocket is really good. And I also, thought he was a decent enough singer that he could do some backgrounds. And we ended up, it was sort of one of those things where he learned the songs so fast. Like I called him and he was out like 4 days later, and we played the first show with him and he knew every song. So I was like, oh, this is a guy who's in a cover band. He learns a song every 5 seconds.
That's good.
So he literally learned all of our songs in like 2 days. And it was crazy. But I mean, and his personality immediately was the opposite of what I had, in the sense that the first guy we had was really sort of like excited about being on tour, and like the whole tour life thing was really like all he was about. Whereas Farley came in and he'd already done it all, and he was a professional and he sort of knew what to expect. And there wasn't a lot about touring. He was an anchor for me, still is to this day. He's still the guy that like keeps me from losing it when there's a lot of pressure, even with various aspects of touring or playing shows. Like even when we did Shiprock earlier this year or earlier in 20, he just made it easier.
That's cool.
That guy.
Yeah. So then your second album, Duality, you wrote 36 songs for this and you picked the best ones. So the single Fallen Angels, is it true that song was inspired by Kevin Smith's movie Dogma?
No, it's not. But here's why that's a thing.
Okay.
So first of all, the song is inspired by two very, very important songs to me. So the first song is Eyes of a Stranger by Queensryche.
Oh, great song.
It's actually Operation Mindcrime in general. So that whole record, the intro to it, the way that it goes into the beginning of Operation Mindcrime at the beginning, that whole thing is literally how Fallen Angels starts. So Fallen Angels starts with the talking, and then it starts with the snare thing, and then it goes into the song. Most people never realized that it was literally structured like the beginning of Operation Mindcrime.
I didn't think of that.
And then the riff itself, the actual verse riff, was based on a band that I was obsessed with very early on that most people didn't know, but everyone knows now, and it was Mr. Bungle.
Oh,
So
I love them. Yeah.
Yeah, so there was a song called Travolta on Carnival, which was 1989, I think, was the record. And I was obsessed with that groove. And the Travolta song is like voodoo way.
Yeah, yes, that one.
And then I was like, oh, I'm gonna write a song like that, and that's what Fallen Angels verse is based on.
Oh, okay. So were you a fan of that movie at all, or is that just total Wikipedia BS?
So what happened with the movie is that shortly after Duality came out, some guy on the internet put scenes from Dogma and timed it with Fallen Angels.
Okay,
and it
weird.
Sense because obviously they go together.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So then explain this. This is a crazy story. I mean, I interview a lot of musicians. I've never heard a story like this. So you guys released the record, and then later you find out there's an error in the song, like a skip on the CD, and so you had to like recall all these CDs, and Best Buy, they wouldn't sell it, or they wouldn't. So that hurt your sales, right?
Yeah. So we call this the curse of Ra, basically, because we have a few stories where we're poised to do really cool things, and then somehow something sort of out of our control screws everything up. The first one on Duality was they manufactured the CD, and then Avery Littman called me and was like, "Hey, well, just gotta let you know we have a digital glitch in the first 40 seconds of the album." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, so what do we do?" And he's like, "Well, some of the vendors are gonna, just offer people to come back and get a replacement. But Best Buy is not gonna sell a defective CD, so they have to pull it off the shelves." And I was like, wow. And so basically, just to make it make sense in a business sense, we scanned about 9,000 CDs the first week of that period, which put us at about 140, somewhere in that range on the top 200 Billboard chart. And the very next week, when Best Buy came in, we did 9,000 again. So what that means is, more likely than not, we would have done probably 12 or 13,000 the first week had Best Buy been in there.
Yeah.
And the difference between 9,000 and 13,000 on the Billboard that year would have been the difference between 140 and number 60.
Oh,
so we would have literally been in the top 100, almost top 50, had we gotten that 13,000. It would have literally changed the entire dialogue of how people talked about the band,
right?
And radio and everything.
And then the other thing on that album was that you guys was this the one where they had the police cover everything, every little thing she does is magic? This is interesting. You were saying that a lot of people thought it was the Police, so their sales spiked and people weren't buying your version. But your version's like heavier. They're both good versions, but I mean, it does sound.
Here's an interesting coincidence. Okay. And I'm not sure that this plays out time-wise, but it might just have been in people's psyche.
Okay.
In the movie Demolition Man.
Oh, I love that movie.
Sylvester Stallone. Right?
Yes. And Rob Schneider, Sandra Bullock. Yeah.
Thing redid the song Demolition Man, which is a Police song, with Dave Navarro. So we did like a hard rock version of Demolition Man. Okay. So when our song came out, there were people who were like, "Oh, I really like this. It's like, it must be like a rock version that Sting did." And so basically, Universal were very, very heavy in data. Like, they know everything about data research. So they were watching all the numbers. But the reason why that's the second instance of the rockers is because Fallen Angels was actually going up the chart pretty convincingly. And it was going up. We were already in the mid-20s. And Dave Downey, the radio guy, was making the push. And then out of nowhere in Cincinnati, this radio station started playing on a hot AC station, started playing Every Little Thing. and it went bananas and it went crazy. So Universal was like, wait, stop the presses. This is on Hot AC. This is a much bigger format. This is much more important. And they literally stopped what everybody was doing on the Fallen Angel side and focused on that. So that killed the single a little bit. And then the other thing, oh man, there's so many, but like, well, then there's the Raw curse as it applies to, but I just remembered it. I can't remember what it was. But there's another time where it sort of was like completely out of our control. Oh, when we signed a deal with a company called Cement Shoes Records, and the guy offered us $125,000 and a whole thing. And we got to the point where we had what's called execution copies of the contract, where you're just supposed to sign it. And we signed ours, and he never signed his, but he put our record out anyway. And so we ended up in a situation where he had released our live record and our other record wasn't going to come out, and it all just like fell apart at the last second, but the guy still released the album, and like it was a full-on nightmare.
Wow, that sounds like a nightmare.
It sucked up 2 years, like really good 2 years of what we were doing. From 06 to 08, we could have been out touring and sort of marketing what we were doing, but we didn't get a chance to.
That's lame. So that first tour you did, I think you were married or in a relationship at the time, and you were really stressed out about your voice, and you didn't do any of the rock star stuff like getting drunk and going crazy with girls. And then the second tour, you did that stuff, but then you're like, this isn't me, right? You kind of experimented with that and it just wasn't your thing.
So basically, first of all, I'm sort of like a serial monogamist. So that's part of the problem too. I mean, I'm just not, but the side effect of sort of being on tour and watching all the other bands just be sort of crazy and not being able to partake is that by the time I was able to partake several years later, it sort of seemed dumb. Like it wasn't like, oh my God, I can't wait to do this for 3 years. It was like, all right, let me try it. And I was like, okay, now I did it. Big deal. None of it stuck to me because first of all, the anxiety of singing well is still a thing to this day.
Okay.
Performing a show and having, my voice in good health is, these aren't songs that you can just wait. I used to get so mad at Sean from Seether because Sean would do all kinds of crazy partying all night after a show, be crazy, wake up at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, smoke a cigarette, get on stage and sound check and sound perfect. And just sound, obviously he's singing scratchy Nirvana-esque vocals, but still, it was just like, oh man, I needed a humidifier. I was like with Celine Dion and the thing and writing on a chalkboard, so I didn't use my voice. And it was a nightmare. Like it was just a nightmare, but you can't sing the chorus and rectifier as the second song in a show without having your voice.
Yeah.
You can't half-ass any of these.
Right.
So it just became one of those things where it's like, geez, I'm doing 6 shows a week and I'm singing my face off. I got to figure this out.
Mm-hmm. Well, so then, and then you did, like you said, you're monogamous. So now you're in a relationship and you had this solo record that you wrote the songs about your wife. And I listened to some of this today. These are good songs. I mean, it's a little departure from Raw, but I mean, it's like, how did you not really try to promote that very much, or why do you think that didn't take off?
I didn't, the sad sort of truth about, not only Raw, but my own career in general is that I learn everything late. So promotion is one of those things that I didn't really understand. I didn't understand how it worked. Obviously by the time 2012 rolled around, which is when I put that record out, the landscape had changed dramatically and I didn't know what it was. I literally didn't really know how to promote and market something on the internet. I just had no clue. I knew how to make a good record. I knew how to put it out, but I didn't know how to get anybody to listen to it. The truth with that record is that there are, that was supposed to be sort of my Sting, John Mayer exorcism. I just wanted to get all of that stuff out of my system. And plus I had written these songs for my wife when I met her and we was just starting to date. And I wrote these songs with the, sort of without, they were out of my control. They really just came out. I love there's so much back at that time that I could not control myself. Like I had to write these songs. So by the time I was done with the songs, I had 7 of them. And I was like, geez, if I write 5 more, I got a record. So I just wrote 5 more songs and made the album 12 songs. And and that was that. And Scooter, the raw drummer, played on the whole thing, and we had a blast, and we both sort of got into it. I think people will rediscover that at some point. I might even go back and remix those songs and re-release it or do something.
It's cool. Yeah, I like it. It's good stuff. You've done a lot of this like producer and co-songwriting stuff. I got to ask you about this. Did you work on, or did you write a song or two or several with the Black Moods? Because that's one of my favorite bands, and I saw that and I was like, wait, what song did he write? I don't know which one.
I wrote one song with them, and it has to do, maybe it's called When It Rains or something like that. It's like the last song on the Medicine, not the last album, but maybe the album before
Medicine.
Yeah, something like that. I don't know their albums by name, but I talked to them because they actually were really cool and helpful when we were in Arizona shooting our video. They let us shoot our photo shoot, the raw photo shoot, at their rehearsal space.
Okay.
Josh is awesome. I love those guys. I think they're really cool.
That's really cool. Yeah, because that was like before. I mean, they're more, nationally known now, but back in 2016 or 2015, I mean, they were super more local. So, and then you've gone on to work with all these big bands, Diamante, Stitched Up Heart, and are you doing something with Bad Wolves, or did you do something with them?
Well, I wrote with Tommy Vext 2 songs that were technically Bad Wolves songs, but obviously now I don't know what they are.
Oh, okay.
Because he's not in the band. So I think he may be taking those songs with him into whatever he's going to do. I know one of them I love. Like, one of them is like just a crushing, awesome radio song. So I'm hoping he puts that out. He told me what he was planning to do with it. I don't want to speak on it because I don't want to give up anything. But yeah, he's going to do that. I've known, I know Doc from Bad Wolves really, really well. And so there's, I don't know where all of that's going to end up. But yeah, the sort of the 2 biggest projects that I have right now that I did the stuff with Motley Crue. I did 3 songs with them. But right now, the 2 projects that I'm sort of super hyper focused on, other than Raw, are Starset, and I'm doing LaJohn Witherspoon's solo record.
Right, from Sevendust?
Yeah, from Sevendust. So those are the 2 projects.
Those are the 2 ones, okay.
I put my eggs in both of those baskets. And it's funny, too, because they're, I was talking to LJ recently. He was here at my house, and I realized that, my relationship with Dustin is sort of like what I've helped to create. Mm-hmm. And with LJ, it's like, who created me? So it's like, there's so much, there's so many things that are, Sevendust was one of those bands that when we were starting out, you would say, oh, okay, we were really good tonight. We did a really good show, but what does that mean if we're going on with Sevendust? You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter how good we were. We had to measure it by the Sevendust bar. Are we as good as that live? And that was sort of, the thing. And then I always tell about the first show we played in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And it was a big radio show, and Disturbed was on it, and Sevendust was on it, Stereo Mud, Cinder, all these old bands. And we ended up opening directly for, I think it was Seether too. So it was us, Seether, then Sevendust, and then Disturbed. So I've been talking pretty consistently about Sevendust for years. I mean, I loved Denial in '99. Like, I was obsessed. So I'm standing there and I'm singing the second song, Rectifier, like I was saying, it's the second song. So I'm in Rectifier, and I just turn left, and the entire band of Sevendust is standing there watching us. And I'm just like, oh no, like, I'm freaking out. I'm like, oh my God, don't sing anything wrong. Don't screw up the lyrics, mate, all the notes, don't be crazy, And then I came to find out many years later that one of LJ's favorite bands of all time was Raw, which was sort of crazy.
Wow, and that's really cool.
His wife were, pretty connected with the Duality record, because they were like meeting up together when that record was out. Oh. And so now we're like best buds, and he brought his family here and stuff like that. But yeah, very excited about his record. His record has got, it's all very not Sevendust, but it's all really.
Okay, well, they'll definitely look for that. And then, so tell me about going back to the Motley Crue stuff that you did. You guys wrote 3 songs that ended up on the album. I think you actually wrote 9 songs. They were all called The Dirt, and then you narrowed it down to the 3.
Nikki and John wrote a bunch of songs called The Dirt. Then we got together and we narrowed it down to 3. but we only needed one.
Yeah.
So what happened was we finished all three, and then they're like, you know what? We like all three. So, and then we did a cover. They did like a Virgin cover. Yeah. So I was, so the fun part for me is, you know, I helped write those songs and arrange them and stuff like that. And then ultimately I sang all the background vocals on all of them. So that was really fun.
That's super amazing. Yeah. So who did you actually sit down with? Cause I saw you like, you posted a picture of you and Vince and you're like, I finally get to meet Vince. And I'm like, well, but didn't he co-write the songs or how does it work? Like they take bits and pieces and put it together or?
No, basically, and going back even to Motley Crue's history, Nikki wrote most of the songs.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So Nikki came over to my house and we started working on stuff and we just got into a really good flow. And he became sort of like a house member. He was at the house for like 4 months. And he was just constantly coming over. And, you know, he was always an interesting guy to have around. You get the best, you know, I always, you know, going back to like talking to Dave Draiman and talking to the guys in Korn and talking to the guys in Sevendust and talking to the bands that I grew up with that I liked, you know, the Theory of a Deadmans and the Chevelles and all of those bands. You get all the rock and roll stories. Mm-hmm. But then you realize when you're talking to Nikki Sixx that you've never really actually heard a real rock and roll story. Like a real rock and roll story from Nikki Sixx makes all the other rock and roll stories really pretty amateurish. So you're dealing with a whole other level of craziness. But yeah, he was at the house a bunch of times and he was great. And, you know, we still chat here and there together.
So does he tell you rock and roll stories that are like not in the book or the movie, The Dirt? Cause I mean, the book and that movie were like, I mean, I read the book first and then saw the movie, but I mean, it's both pretty crazy.
He told me so many that I realized after fact that some of them were in the book and some of them weren't.
Okay.
So there were stories, you know, until I sort of investigated it all. You know, me and him had a funny moment very early on because he started talking to me about Saints of Los Angeles and all of these other songs. And I was like, dude, I know Home Sweet Home, Girls, Girl, Girls, and Dr. Feelgood. That's it.
Really?
I don't know any other Motley Crue songs. And he was like, so basically in the beginning, I had to tell him that like when I was growing up, the kids that liked Metallica and Slayer didn't listen to Motley Crue and Guns N' Roses. Like we were a different crew growing up.
Right. I was the weirdo that liked it all. I know. I was definitely the weirdo that liked it all, but yeah, you're right. For a lot of people,
but you're significantly younger than me. So you have to remember, we're talking about the early 80s here.
Okay. Right. Yeah.
So in the early 80s, there's no, you know, you're on one team or the other. The guy with the feathered hair and the patches with the Motley Crue was not hanging out with the dude with the short hair and the leather jacket that said Celtic Frost and Slayer.
Sure.
So anyway, the moral of this story is I told him, I was like, look, you know, for me, my thing was Metallica. Like Metallica was everything. James Hetfield taught me how to downpick. Like I wanted to be James Hetfield on stage with my band. And so it became sort of a running joke. And anytime we would come up with something good, like some idea that was good, Nikki would be like, well, it's good. It's not Metallica, but it's good. You know, so he would always rub it in. And then one day he texted me and he said, hey, it'd be a couple of weeks since I'd seen him. He texted me and said, hey, I got you a present. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And he was like, yeah, it's James Hetfield related. And I'm like, if it's not James Hetfield himself, I'm not interested. And because he was always being a practical joker, so I wasn't quite sure where he was going with it. But he's like, no, you're going to like it. And I'm like, okay, cool. So then when he came to my house, he ended up giving me this James Trussart guitar that was an Explorer, a Fender Explorer. Yeah, I'll show it to you.
Wow. No, that's really cool. Like, so it's actually James Hetfield's guitar that oh, wow. That's really cool.
Look at the finish. It's all alligator print.
Oh.
So this is a James Trussart Explorer, and Trussart makes very, very expensive guitars by hands.
Okay. Did he make that specifically for James Hetfield, you're saying?
Well, the story goes like this. He made 10 of those guitars and immediately got a cease and desist letter from Gibson saying that you cannot call this an Explorer. You cannot make this guitar. This is an infringement on our fucking whatever.
Okay.
And whatever. So he only made 10. I got that one, and James Hetfield has 2.
Oh, okay.
So only 10 of them. So I have one of the 10 that are made on the planet.
Oh, I don't even know. I didn't ask how Nikki Sixx got. He's Nikki Sixx. He just says, give me that.
Nikki went to James Trussart to buy a bass.
Okay.
and saw that guitar and was like, hey, what's up with that guitar? And just ended up buying it.
That's super cool. What's a neat story. So let's talk about, we kind of touched a little bit on the new Raw song, Intercorrupted. Sure. But I love this song. I love the melodies. I'm not musical. I don't know if it's melodies or harmonies, but there's like keyboards playing during the chorus. It's like a hook. I think this is the best Raw song ever made, in my opinion. I love it.
All right. Well, I'm glad you think that. Yeah, for me personally, I was trying to create the best of Raw in one song.
Okay, I think you did it.
And also incorporate all the bands that I work with now, right? Because a lot of the bands, like one of the bands that I mentioned before that I work with a lot is Starset. And that universe is loosely connected. There's a small wormhole between Dustin's universe and the Raw universe. And what I like about what I've learned working with him is about what he would say, what he would use the term gravitas. And he always talks about sort of like this larger than life thing. And I've always, for me, it's always been about that on certain kinds of songs. And then the literal opposite on other songs. I mean, I was trying to explain this to somebody the other day, that with Raw, we sort of, even from the very beginning, had a wide palette. There wasn't like just heavy songs or just like, it wasn't always like, it was like we could do a poppy song and then do something that's heavy and still be the same band, especially as we continued past Duality. I mean, I have a song on Critical Mass about masturbating to Katy Perry. So there's no rules in terms of subject matter or feel or vibe and songwriting. So when it came to doing Intercorrupted, I wanted to write something that made people feel like, oh, that's the band I remember, but also with the ability to possibly get on Octane and actually be considered a viable modern track.
No, that's why I reached out, because I was going through the list of rock album or rock charted songs, and I was like, next. And then I heard this song, and then even my girlfriend she came out and she goes, whoa, what's that song? That's really good. I was like, it is, isn't it? Right? It's really good. So, but explain to me the lyrics of this one, because this goes a little deeper. This is not about jerking off to Katy Perry. This is like some heavy stuff here, isn't it? It's about bringing children into the world and their expectations that the world's going to be all happy and roses. And then they find out, actually, reality sometimes can suck. And so, I don't know, you can explain it better than I can. It's your song, but
yeah, I mean, the way that I like to say it in the shortest in the shortest way is we all share the responsibility for creating the people we don't like. So when we're, if you think about the last year or two of divisiveness and craziness with politics and all that stuff, people on the far left are just as responsible for creating the people on the far right as much as the people on the far right are responsible for creating the people on the far left. Because when you feed the extremes, they get stronger. So the more liberal you are, the more pissed off the other guy is. The more right-wing conservative you are, the more pissed off the liberal is. They're feeding off of each other, but they're doing it unconsciously. And what Intercorrupted is that we have to accept our own, what's corrupted within ourselves before we can ever evolve beyond just the blind cycle of hatred, right? Because the second someone decides, oh, I'm doing this specifically, that's creating your reaction. My action here, my defiance, my lack of empathy and clarity is directly contributing to your inability to understand me. So in my, I moved from Los Angeles to Fort Wayne, Indiana.
That's a culture shock.
Wayne, and I'm a guy, I'm half Puerto Rican, half Russian Jew from New York City. I've lived in LA for 10 years. I moved to the state that voted, that was called for Trump the earliest. Right. So this is technically the reddest state in the country. Yet, when I talk to all of our friends, we have tons of friends who are avid Trump supporters. When I talk to them consciously and with information, and you find out it's so silly how many things we want that are exactly the same. There's literally nothing that is a big item that we don't want the same. What happens is we're simply fed the echo chamber right left enough to where we prioritize the things that don't necessarily even amount to that much. So
I agree with all this.
Yeah,
You're spot on right now.
There's a lot of, positioning and psychological chess being played by both sides. And what happens is, whether you're reading Breitbart or you're watching MSNBC, you are a pawn in this game, and you're being used to move the dialogue left or right based on which makes more money.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're, at the end of the day, committed to watching MSNBC because you've now been indoctrinated into the far left idea of, certain aspects of sensationalized socialism or whatever it is, or conversely, if you only watch Fox News and only agree with Laura Ingraham because she's the only one who speaks the truth, you're also sort of dealing with a alternate reality that you're not aware of, but you're living in it as a consumer. You're being used as a customer. So they're literally creating ads and everything based on the fact that you have a perception and a perspective that they gave to you.
Mm-hmm.
So all of this stuff very quickly sort of illustrates how we get divided. But the only way I believe you can end up being connected or reconnected or evolve past the pettiness is if you spend enough time observing yourself, because you have to observe your behavior, your wants and needs before you can dissect the pieces and cut out the pieces that are really just there as a reflection of a movement that has nothing to do with you.
Mm-hmm.
So to make that a simpler analogy, when I'm here in Fort Wayne talking to people that I genuinely have known for 10 years and that I love, but they have wildly different political views, it's not that hard for me to speak to them with compassion and to actually learn different perspectives that I wouldn't be open to because I genuinely love them. But we live in a society now where we don't get that because 90% of our interaction online is with people we don't even know. So there's no empathy, there's no compassion. Why would there be? These are literally just robots, emotional, crazy people on the other side of the world who are typing inanimate letters.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes very easy to sort of,
so not even
paralyze it.
Getting in touch with yourself and figuring out what you need and what you want and what you think, but also listening to other people, not listening to different news or look at different articles, but actually just talk to people. And you're right. I think you find you have a lot more common ground with people, and a lot of us agree on the same problems. We just maybe not always agree on the same solutions to the problems, but I think there's a lot more.
But even to that point, a lot of the times, people will parrot the solution that they've been told without understanding what their solution is. So people will be anti some policy, or, like people who are anti-Trump are like, oh, his China policy was crazy. And the fact is he probably had pretty decent China policy, and he did some good stuff in the Middle East. People have to understand that. By the same token, we can't take that out of the things we didn't like about him too.
Right.
Like, you have to be able to, what always frustrates me is that people are willing to treat the rest of the world differently than they would want themselves to be treated. And that's the thing. If you can't engage what your own wants and needs and respect level is for yourself, then you have no ability to be respectful for anyone else.
Well said. Very well said. That was deeper. That was a good analysis of those song lyrics. So that's what that's kind of all about then.
Yeah, it's the thread, like and if I were to, a soundbite version of it is the last line of the chorus. Is everything comes down to the last line of the chorus. And the last line of the chorus is, it's too dark for the world to see the light between you and me.
That's beautiful.
That's literally
really cool. Yeah, no, that's good. I love that song. I think it's the best Raw song. So I hope people check it out. I hope it continues to get airplay or Spotify playlists or whatever on movies and TV. I think that's kind of the big thing now, right? Is getting on like a movie soundtrack or a TV show, because nobody's buying. Not very many people are, unfortunately, are buying records, right?
Yeah, but that's who cares about buying records. What all I want is I want the people to be able to find our Spotify page and find us on YouTube.
So type in Intercorrupted. That you're the only one. That's a made up word.
Find it. Plus, you know, I mean, I don't want to speak before it's out, but the album, you know, this record for me, like you said, that was the best song. I don't think that's even the best song on the record.
Ooh, well, I'm excited to hear the rest
of that.
Yeah.
I think there's stuff on this record that really sort of is irreverent in some regards, but even hookier.
Oh, you know, okay.
My songwriting sort of chops are now hyper focused and refined because I write 15 to 20 songs a month. So it's like there's so many bands that I work with and so many artists, and I'm always sort of picking and choosing the things that I put in my toolbox. I think this record, you know, and also, you know, like as a singer, I feel comfortable in my role as a top singer. Like I never liked being said, "Oh, you're one of the best singers." Again, the way that I am, I take that as a responsibility. But I think that with this record, people will listen to me singing and be like, well, yeah, like no one else really can do that.
Yeah, because isn't it true? I don't think you do this anymore, but you did hold the record for the longest single note by a male vocalist in a song. You held a high B note for 24 seconds.
Yeah, and it was sort of stupid because it wasn't intended. I mean, I still think I technically still give myself the credit because I did it in a show. It was a live show and it was on a live album. And the guy who broke it did it on an album, you know, like did it in a studio. So I'm always suspect about guys holding a song. The guy held a note for 42 seconds on a metal song, but which is possible. And I didn't do it on purpose anyway.
Okay.
I mean, the moral of the story is that became a thing, and I don't really know why, but
it's cool,
ultimately, yeah, it's sort of a cool thing. But ultimately, you know, I'm just saying that like I'm sort of okay in my skin right now as a singer.
Yeah.
And I feel like I don't have to I'm not really competing with anybody.
No, but so, and then as a songwriter, do you save the best songs for Raw, or do you just...
Here's the funny thing. It takes me so much longer to write stuff for other artists than it does for me to write for myself. Like just recently I had a song that I had to finish, and I've done it so many times that the language of Ra is the one that I reserved for the higher vibration, and I just sort of channel it, honestly. It's very rare that the lyrics for a Ra song or the top line melodies take me more than a half an hour.
That's really cool. You also, I know you guys do that. The Raw does this, the Police cover, but I saw you do like an acoustic cover of Roxanne. And people should check that out. It's on YouTube. And I mean, you hit these notes and I'm just like blown away. That's a really cool cover. I don't know if you can release that on a record, but the YouTube version is really cool.
Yeah, it's been out for a while. Our YouTube page is woefully viewed in terms of like, until we put Intercorrupted we didn't have things that had over 100,000 views. I mean, that has almost 200,000, but yeah, I never really was good with the online promotion thing. Of course, you know, I sang for Maytal Cohen, in one of her projects, but she's the #1 most subscribed drummer in the entire world. So in that regard, I got on some good stuff, but you know, it took until like 2012, 2013 to even meet her.
Yeah. And then, so I did want to ask you, your sister, Rachel. So she's the girl from Total Recall and Falling Down, and that's got to be pretty cool. Do you have any, do you ever get to go to these movie premieres or anything like that? Or?
Never went to a movie premiere with her because I didn't really live in LA when she was making those big movies. But you know, I mean, she's my sister, so it's always like, you know, when I think of Rachel, I think of how annoying she is and how we like fight all the time. But I have great memories of like meeting Arnold on the set of Total Recall. I was in Mexico City when they were shooting. And my other brother, David, has been an assistant director for film for 30 years, almost 40 years.
Wow.
And he's, you know, I worked for him on movie sets. So I've been around movies a lot.
Yeah. And you filmed your Intercorrupted video. You filmed that here in Phoenix, right?
I did.
In suits. You guys were wearing.
Phoenix.
Yeah, it was like, yeah, it's right by the, it used to be the Dodge Theater. I think it's called something else now, but you guys are wearing suits. You said it was 112 and you had to wear those suits?
Yeah.
Ugh,
It was we started at 5:30 in the morning to get ahead of the heat.
Yeah.
And weirdly, because I was just so excited to make a video, we never, Roz never really made a real video. I was so excited that I really didn't notice how hot it was. Like I had a mask on, I had the suit, I was sweating, but I just didn't care. I was having so much fun.
And you guys are not going to tour, or are you going to do any live?
Well, yeah, I mean, we want to tour.
Oh, okay.
We just announced, well, our pre-sale just got started, and we announced in the pre-sale that we're doing a virtual concert that's going to air the day the record comes out.
Okay. What is the day the record? Do we have an official date on that?
March 19th.
March 19th. Okay. So people should definitely check that out. And then do you have a charity that you work with or you want to give a shout out to here?
I mean, I've always defaulted to St. Joseph's, the Children's Hospital.
Okay. St. Joseph's? That's not, so wait, not St. Jude's. That's a different one?
I think St. Joseph's is the one in New York. There's one that is a children's hospital. It's actually a hospital. Oh. If you go online, I think it's St. Joseph's. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I will put that in the link. So if people can throw a few bucks that way, that'd be good too. Is there anything else you want to talk about? Anything I missed? I think we covered it all, right?
Nope. Just the pre-sales going on. And if you're even mildly interested in hanging out with us, just go to our website, rawband.net. It has all the links to everything. So if you're having a hard time finding us on Instagram or finding us anywhere, just rawband.net has everything.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much, Sahaj. I appreciate it.
No worries, dude. Thank you.
All right. Cool. See ya. Bye-bye.
All right.
Sahaj Ticotin, frontman for the band Raw. Check out the band's website and the new single, Intercorrupted. It's a great song. Follow them on social media. Follow me on social media. And you can also subscribe to the podcast via Apple Podcasts or my YouTube channel. I've got some great episodes on there like the Black Moods and PJ Farley, both people that we talked about in this episode. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the show. Enjoy the rest of your day. And remember, shoot for the moon.